Welcome to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth, and we're here to preserve and promote culture, one weekly conversation at a time. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show through iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Google Play, and a whole bunch of other venues. Just visit our sites, chimeraobscura.com/VM or vmspod.com to find more information, along with our RSS feed. And follow the show on Twitter and Instagram at VMSPod. Well, I'm in a pretty good brain right now. On Monday morning, I read this wonderful essay by past guest Langdon Hammer about the late poet Sandy McClatchy, also a past guest. And it put me into this kind of thankful reverie about just what a gift the podcast has been to me. And what a wonder it is that I've gotten to meet just so many amazing people through it, both the guests and listeners, as well as people who've connected me to other guests, whatever, all the people I've gotten to meet. And it's a lot of work to put this together every week, but any time I get to step back and just look at what it's brought me, I never doubt that it's all been worth it. Anyway, if you've been keeping up with the show regularly, and I think maybe 2 or 3 people do that, here's a mini update. Last week's trade show in New York City went just fine. I literally recorded right before getting in the car and heading to the hotel. A company signed on to join my trade association like 30 seconds after I walked in the door at the Javits Center Tuesday morning, so that made for a nice start. I had a good time in the city overall, but I was glad that I stayed in a hotel in New Jersey. I was staying in Weehawken in this nice hotel right next to the ferry. The ferry drops you off right behind the Javits Center. It's a 5-minute walk, blah, blah, blah. The upshot was, A, the hotel was quiet. B, it was inexpensive. C, I got this great run in the first morning of the show. A little before sunrise, I did a 6.3 miler, just like the distance I do with my running group, except I got to do it running along the Hudson and got to watch the sunrise up through the Manhattan skyline. So that was pretty goddamned awesome, all things considered. And I nearly set a personal record for my 10K distance, which I was not expecting to do. Otherwise, I saw a pal and past podcast who I will leave nameless here for dinner in the city the night before the trade show. She's been having a rough time, and I've been trying to F the ineffable, as I put it lately. So it was good to spend some time, just gabbing, even if we talk past each other on a couple of moments. There was this really funny instance where she asked me if I was getting ready to retire in the next year or two. And those of you who don't know, I'm 50 years old and have a day job. And I realized in that moment that she either thinks I make a lot more money than I do, I'm a lot older than I am, or her standard of living is really, really low. And I think it's some combo of the first and third factors there. I am not prepping for retirement. I do save a shit ton of money because that's my nature. But it's way too expensive to live in this day and age with the need to make the show on a regular basis. Anyway, one of the neat things was that on the way to dinner that night, I happened to pass the gallery where last week's guest, Zoe Beloff, mentioned that the controversial late Philip Guston paintings were on display. The gallery is Hauser and Worth on 11th Avenue in Chelsea. And when I passed by, it was closing for the day, but I visited the next day, right after the trade show, and spent some time just looking at these tough and weird paintings. And I don't have enough background in all of Guston's work to kind of see them in the continuum of that career. But, I tried to engage with them. I tried to really look not just at the content, but at the compositions, but also, try to get up close and understand a little of the brush strokes and what goes into putting this sort of painting together. And then the fact that these are really controversial works. A bunch of them have Ku Klux Klan imagery. These cartoonish hooded figures doing just banal stuff like driving around and having a cigar. I get why people were freaked out, especially, in summer of 2020 with the BLM movement really pushing for racial justice in this country and elsewhere. At the same time, I like to think the world's mature enough not to take Guston's paintings of that era somehow as an endorsement of the Klan. I get the whole trigger warning thing, and this is a lot of stuff I talked about with Zoe last week, and it doesn't actually come up this week. But anyway, I just wanted to say that it was a really strong experience aesthetically. I'll put it that way. So if you're in the city, Hauser and Worth on 11th Avenue around 23rd Street, actually 23rd Street around 11th Avenue, well, whatever, Hauser and Worth, Philip Guston, you should go see it. And I will note that notion that the world has a degree of maturity is probably tied into why I produce an hour-plus arts conversation podcast every week, when I could just be sitting around watching Marvel movies or something. Anyway, let's get to this week's show. My guest this time around is the cartoonist and animator Dash Shaw, who has a new book and a new movie out. We're going to focus on the book this time. It's called Discipline from New York Review Comics. But the new movie, Crypto Zoo, is also a trip, and we do talk about it in relation to Discipline. And anyway, you'll hear all that. Discipline. It is about a Quaker in Indiana who joins the Union Army during the Civil War. And it's also about the family and Quaker meeting that he leaves behind. And the text for it is derived from letters and journals of that era, and Dash fashions that into this haunting story about war and the loss of innocence, and really the tension between, I don't know, the temporal and the transcendent, or church and state, or man and God, however you kind of frame that. And we see the ramifications of Charles' rash decision to join up, and the nightmare of any war, even one fought for a just cause like ending slavery. At the same time, we see his former Quaker meeting as they debate, what we render unto Caesar and what we owe to the Lord. It's a fascinating story, and Dash tells it in a, we'll say, unconventional style. The art has no panel borders. Some of the images montage with one another. There's almost no word balloons. Again, most of the text is conveyed. Well, it's derived from letters and journals, but it's also conveyed in that format throughout the book. And giving himself these constraints really kind of allows him to explore storytelling and evoke a historical moment in really interesting ways. And one thing we talk about during the conversation is the difference, as I try to put it, between action and activity. And Discipline explores that by portraying the complexity of some day-to-day activities of both war and peace, and contrasting them with an almost cinematic action mode at times. I'm not doing it justice, but Discipline is a really thoughtful and lovely book, and is sort of the case with the variety of visual styles Dash has worked in over the course of his career. This one has a sort of uncanny storytelling grammar that'll draw you in pretty quickly. But it tells a story in a different way than you might be used to from other graphic novels or comics. Now, speaking of cinematic, as I mentioned, Dash also has a new animated movie out. It's called Crypto Zoo. It's distributed by Magnolia Pictures. Crypto Zoo is it's tough to describe. It's a Vietnam-era story about a woman who hunts cryptids, or monsters, to protect them from poachers and illegal traders and the military. And it's got amazing hallucinatory art and color choices wedded to this tense action story of the chase to rescue a dream-eating cryptid from a military group that's after it. And the Crypto Zoo features a great voice cast led by vocal queen Lake Bell. And to tell the story, Dash uses this really limited animation style. So we're not talking like Pixar or, Uncanny Valleys or anything like that. But it all works to the advantage of the story, where the people are relatively flat in comparison to the gorgeous detailing and impossible spectrums of the cryptids. I enjoyed Crypto Zoo. It is a freaky experience to just sit and watch. I hope you get to check it out. It's on various streaming platforms for rental or sale. I bought it through Apple. It's on Amazon and a couple of the other pay services. Anyway, I'm not doing that one justice at all, but I'll put in links to this in the show and episode notes so you can take a look at it yourself. So anyway, I've read Dash's work since 2008 when he made his mega-sized debut, the book Bottomless Belly Button, this 700-page comic from Fantagraphics. So after all these years, it was really nice to sit down with him for a conversation. Also, with all the running around I've been doing lately, I was glad to do a remote episode again. Now here's Dash's bio from Discipline. Dash Shaw was raised Quaker in Richmond, Virginia, where he currently lives. He is the cartoonist of many graphic novels and wrote and directed 2 animated feature films, the most recent of which, Crypto Zoo, won the 2021 Sundance Film Festival's Next Innovator Prize and is distributed by Magnolia Pictures. He began working on Discipline in 2014, and it was drawn over the course of 6 years. And now, the Virtual Memories Conversation with Dash Shaw. Where did Discipline begin for you?
This is something that I just carried with me forever because I grew up Quaker in Richmond, Virginia. And so, I guess as a kid, I was always kind of just as a contrarian kid, I was interested in kind of disagreements inside the meeting house, especially because inside decisions inside Quaker meetings, there's no voting. It has to be absolute consensus decision making. So, for example, they would talk about revamping the playground set that's next to the meeting house, and just to get 20 people to agree is a lot of work, and it's kind of constant talking and the kind of drama inside of meeting houses, and of course silence and sitting in all of those meeting houses, and also being in Richmond where the Civil War is so ever present. I kind of knew about this moment in history where Quakers were anti-slavery, but they were also pacifist. And so there was a rift inside the Quaker community about whether or not to fight in the war. So, as a teenager, I thought, oh, this is an interesting moment in time. It seemed really intimidating, but, I just kind of filed it away. And then I got older, made other comics, and it just stayed with me as a potential subject matter for a book because it felt specific to me, meaning, I hadn't seen another graphic novel about Quakers, and I just felt like it was somehow in my body, from all of those years of going to Quaker meeting and thinking about this stuff. So then, I guess in my late 20s, there was a few things that happened that made doing the book seem more possible. One was seeing a Civil War art show at the Met, and seeing like the Winslow Homer painting, and they were all pretty small scale, and meaning they aren't like giant David paintings. They're
Hmm.
like all they. I don't know if you saw that show, but all of
No.
the paintings are maybe the size of um, a computer screen. Um, and then I was looking at Civil War era illustration, that kind of hatching, those etchings. So I was thinking, oh, drawing something small scale, so many, maybe it made just the scale made it seem more possible. So then I applied for a fellowship at the New York Public Library to research it. And they said, oh, we have an archive of Quaker letters and diary entries from this time. So that was huge. So
Yeah.
this was in 2014. I began that fellowship. I had an office at the library. I was there for a year from 2014 to 2015, just going through their archive, looking at everything. Um, so I kind of, that of course made it much more possible, but then there was more mind warps, more confusing things as you kind of dig into the material there.
Yeah. How so?
How's that? Well,
How
I
so?
think
What confused you, or what created that aporia or flummoxing? I guess.
I think a lot of it is a personality, my personality, whereas
Mhm.
like when I began it, I thought it might be something like Louis Riel, a book I really, really love, that's sort
Hmm.
of explaining a moment in time, and there are historical graphic novels like that, and it's usually like a sentence above a panel that says this person did this at this time, and
Right.
then there's a drawing that's their illustration of that, and there's a lot of great books that are like that. um, but I think when those people are researching something, as they get the information, it becomes more rendered in their mind, they more understood. But I think because I'm who I am, as I've dove into it, it actually became less knowable and more confusing. And like for instance, I would know there was a giant, battle on a particular day, and I would get the soldier's diary, and it would just be what they ate or the weather.
Yeah.
Um, I would know all, about a person, but I would look at their letters and it would be about something completely different. Um, also, then it kind of became okay. The subject matter of the book that was interesting was, the dissonance between what people are saying or thinking versus what they're doing physically, what we know their bodies were doing. Um, and that made a lot of sense to me. Um, also, again, it's a personality issue. When I got letters that I couldn't really understand what they were saying, or I wondered how, similar this person is to me from all these years ago, those letters that someone else might have chucked, been like, okay, I don't get what they're talking about here. This isn't for my book. I liked those letters. I leaned into those letters, leaned into the kind of mysterious aspect of wondering how much their brains were like our brains, or how much their psychology is knowable or unknowable to us. So I think all of these things are present in the book, and in discipline. Um,
Yeah, to that extent, when you mention something like Louis Riel, and whether it's prose or comics, historical fiction, did you feel as though you were almost a student of that form, or was it more, this is how I want to tell a story, and the story happens to be based in history? You
hmm.
get what I'm asking?
Um, That's
how much were you, I guess, were you consciously, getting away from some of the models of historical fiction, I guess?
I wouldn't say it was a conscious choice. It was more like I had this moment in time that I was interested in, and I sort of pictured in my head before I started it being something more explanatory. And then when I got into it and grappled with it, I had to grapple with the combination of the materials and my own interests. And, not to sound cheesy, but the book kind of eventually starts to tell you what it wants, what makes sense for it. And, I worked on this book for many, many years, and it was very, very hard. And I think it was hard to listen to what the book wanted, because there are so few books or media about Quakers, period, that I felt I was maybe going to disappoint a lot of people by not giving them something that was more informational. There's kind of key, because the book is narrated from the Friends, from a brother and sister in the Friends community. It doesn't have that, third person
Explication of
narrator
everything.
kind of
Yeah.
explaining key information. You sort of have to puzzle it out. However, I could be delusional. But I do think that that this book as a whole, is, I hope, contributing something to, Quakers and this time, in that dissonance that I was talking about, like in ideals that one might have in their head versus what people are doing with their bodies, and kind of an activated silence and activated negative space in the book. That I think the things that I was hoping to do did.
It worked. Trust me.
Someone else can be the judge of it, but the content that I was searching for at the beginning did arrive, just in ways that took that maybe non-literal ways that took me a long time to figure out.
Mm-hmm. I hate going explicitly political with the show, but as you said, you began in 2014, which is the Obama years. Did the book change for you during the next administration also, in terms of what all that meant to the country as you were living it, and what you were trying to represent with the Civil War?
Well, it made me really not want to work on it.
Okay.
Because it just felt like my headspace did not want to be in the Civil War, even though I always thought of it as more of a Quaker book than a Civil War book. It just felt too daunting, to have. But the thing is, and this is absolutely the most obvious thing to say, but it's still worth saying, is even during the Obama years, when you start researching the Civil War, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago. It feels like very present. And then when I lived or I still live in Richmond, Virginia, a couple blocks away from Monument Avenue and everything, I could go to Libby Prison and it's a plaque on the floor of a parking lot. And these things are in the humidity of the air here, before the Trump administration. It just felt, I think for obvious reasons, it felt like I just can't be inside that headspace all the time. It didn't help me with the book. Unfortunately, it felt even harder to work on.
Mm-hmm. Living in Virginia versus me growing up and living in northern New Jersey all my life, what was the Civil War? How was the Civil War represented to you? How was it taught to you, and what sort of tensions did that create as you kind of grew into a larger world?
Well, I think um, I can only speak for myself and growing up, in the 80s and 90s in Richmond, and it it felt my first feelings was that this is a haunted town, and I
Mhm.
meant like literally haunted, um, meaning there's the Confederate cemetery here, and there's a ghost dog at the cemetery. And just as a teenager, that's kind of how I understood it, that there's unresolved ghosts in this town. Many people who've lived in Richmond for a short time have talked about ghosts or spirits in this town. It's and In high school, I would say everything is pretty at least I at the schools that I went to, not discussed, not talked about. I'm sure it's different now, but everything kind of felt swept under the rug. Um, so uh, it I guess it all manifested itself in some kind of unspoken tension.
Did you drift away from Quakerism, or are you still part of a meeting?
Now I have a little 4-year-old girl, and she goes to Quaker meeting, and uh, I didn't go to them as much in when I lived in New York, because part of it is that as everyone is a minister or no one is a minister, meaning that um, people gather and they can speak out of the silence. And when there's those larger meeting houses in Brooklyn, people travel from all over, and sometimes you go and someone will be from out of town and stand up and speak for 20 minutes about something or other, versus these meeting houses that are in smaller communities where it's the same people, and it
Do they
doesn't.
start with more of a statement than a question when they do the ones in Brooklyn, or not? I'm just kidding. I'm sorry.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, I mean, I just mean that there's a very different feeling in a
No, I
small
know.
meeting house versus a big one where there's lots of travelers.
Do you have people you knew from your youth who are still part of the meeting now that
Hmm. My
you speak to?
brother is much more involved in it. He doesn't live here anymore, but he got into the young friends kind of gatherings much more than me.
Mm.
Because it's especially in Richmond, it was a social circle of like mind. Like, you don't have to be vegetarian to be Quaker or whatever, but many of them are, and so it was just a way to kind of find like minded people in Richmond, and so I think my brother made more Quaker friends than friends at the local high school.
Gotcha. Now, when it comes to discipline, you mentioned again, kind of breaking away from some of the modes of historical fiction. Can you talk a little about the form you chose, the structure of the book, the lack of panel lines,
Yeah.
the almost montage nature of some of it? Go on. Yeah.
Well, with all of the things that I do, the form and the content have to feel like they're perfectly synced, and kind of they're each boosting each other up in some way, and it also has to be connected with, um again, not to sound like totally it has to be connected with how they're how they're made,
Mhm.
like, for
Yeah.
instance, I knew I couldn't spend a year at a library researching and like writing and laying out a book, and then in pencil form, and then go and ink it for 3 years. I just knew I wouldn't finish the book, that it would
Mhm.
be like giving myself a giant illustration assignment, meaning that, I'm only using the part of my brain that's like rendering an arm and not the writing part. Um, So I had this idea that came from a few different modes. Or one piece was seeing Civil War era illustration and how it would float, meaning it didn't have um, boxes, like people are maybe familiar with the illustrations to Alice in Wonderland, where it's like a group of lines and they're going one way, and then the group of lines suddenly go up, and that's a shadow where the floor meets the wall, but you're not getting the line of the edge of the floor and the wall. Those groups of lines are just suddenly going up at that point. So it's kind of a way of depicting space where information is missing. I had done a mini comic years before called New Jobs, where everything floated, and I hoped it had some kind of existential feeling where you could still read it, but the kind of negative space between things was activated. So I had done that. I saw this Civil War illustration that kind of felt like it related. And then when I thought about meeting houses, how to really do those silent scenes, powerfully, I thought it has to be an activated negative space where like someone is sitting down and you can tell from their body that they're sitting down, but I'm not drawing the bench that they're sitting on, and that the book would be like things coming out of silence, coming out of the negative page. So thinking of it all that way, it was like, aha, here the form and the content are together. It's one thing that makes sense. Then I thought, well, normally with comics, they're very, very hard to edit because they're in these kind of, paneled pages, so that you can't stick a panel in at one place. It messes up how all of the other pages are laid out. But if everything floats, then everything can kind of be collaged together. So I can sit in my office and and at the library, and I can get footage the way like a documentary filmmaker can just go shoot something and not really know how it fits into their movie, but they have that footage. So for example, they had like the actual pontoon bridge construction diagrams at the library. These giant, these amazing, crazy bridges that they would build while they are going across the river. So I got the diagrams and I spent a couple of weeks just drawing a scene of them making this bridge, and I didn't know how it would fit into my story, but I had that footage. I drew something that day, and then for other times of the day, I was reading and kind of gathering text, because the text floats as well, and the text comes from actual Quaker letters and soldier diary entries. So I kind of was, I thought of myself as getting pieces and trying to find ideally, poetic alignments where this text paired with this image makes a third thing that's unexpected and exciting. And so I maybe I can't sit and plan that a particular sentence next to a particular image will be meaningful, but I can get the materials and find it over the years of, sort of collaging the book together. For the record, I don't recommend making a book this way. It
Yeah.
has, you end up drawing lots of things that don't get used. And it's kind of hard to not use something you spent weeks drawing. You're like, oh, I like this drawing. I wish it could fit in somewhere. The first page of the book has these soldiers doing, they were called Sherman's neckties, where they would break apart railroad rails and heat them up, um, and then bend and wrap them around trees. And so I would read about, soldiers doing this, and kind of drew it, and find text that they were writing at the day. And it felt like like that page just sits outside of the book. It's at the front of the book because I felt like it kind of communicated the tone of the whole book. So I wanted to just put it at the beginning, but it doesn't fit into my story at all. It's almost like a chapter title, like the book is going to be like this. You're going to see this people doing these things. I'm not going to explain it to you. And you're going to have this text that's what these people are thinking about. So I, for many years, I just like had literally, scraps of drawings of people doing things, trees, this, that, and the other, scenes, pieces of text. And it felt like I didn't have a book. It felt like I had a long panel, a long collage, with, and then a few things kind of made it a little, give it some shape as a story. One was when I came across all of these friends' journals where they're debating whether to pay for those that were opposed to the war, fighting, I should say, they how much they should pay of the military tax. And the debate inside of the meeting house was very, very interesting because some people would say, well, we pay these taxes because they're going to help the sick and the wounded, and others would say, well, then we're kind of losing, because Quakers were excused from so many things. Even today, if you're raised Quaker, you're raised a conscientious objector. So it's sort of like they were like, well, if you're opposed to something, you have to stay opposed to it. And then other people are like, well, the let's pay these taxes so then the government can kind of excuse us on all these other things that we do that we don't, where we don't follow what they say. Anyway, the point is, a very interesting debate. And when I figured out how to dramatize that inside the meeting house, it felt like I had more of a beginning, middle, end story. And the other thing that was the key piece was there's a chapter in the center of the book that doesn't have any text. That's what's going on with the sister at the in the Friends community. That is me imagining things going on outside the content of the letters. So when I kind of gave myself permission to do that, and that unlocked the book in a major way, and something about leaving it wordless has an extra special charge, because we're kind of we find out later in the book sort of literally what happened in that scene, but as it's happening in the book, it's sort of like we're seeing something and we're not fully understanding what they're talking about, but we get that something is happening. And it anyway, it was, I mean, I don't, people can read it and decide if it works for them. But in the moment of making it, it felt like this is, it felt unique. I hadn't seen something like that in something before. It felt very specific to the world of this book. And it was exciting. Just to keep rambling, other things that were exciting is like, I would have drawings of the mother and father. The mother's sick, the father's kind of massaging her arms, and I would have the boy in the hospital waking up, stretching his arms. These are drawings that I did years apart. And then I would, aligning them one day, seeing that I can go from one to the next, felt like an unexpected, kind of moment of inspiration where if I had planned it all out, I don't think I would have come up with it. It had to be something that sat for years. And as I was full of self-doubt and, gathering things and wondering if I had a story, whether or not this story should exist, what is there, these things sort of aligned, and I could utilize them.
Do you feel specifically for like a juxtaposition like that, if you were consciously drawing them, together, it would have been more lifeless? Or was there, I guess one of the things I'm interested in, given that it took several years, sticking with the same drawing style, knowing that, you've shifted around among different projects and keeping all of this within the same visual style enough that you can integrate all of those drawings from over the years and
Yeah.
have it look like a consistent book.
Yeah. I knew like, okay, if I, draw with a particular quill pen on a particular paper, and if it's cursive, maybe it could fit in this book, um, the, so that certainly helped, but I don't think I could have planned this book and plotted it all out and made all of those transitions. The style, keeping stylistically consistent, that was something. First of all, if you have like a really, I don't know how many people have this eye, but a close eye, I think you can tell that it was made over many years, and my hand got lighter, meaning there's some drawings that it's that quill pen, but the lines are kind of thicker and just kind of attacking the page in a different way than the lines that were drawn on the last couple of years of the book. But because, page 38 was drawn 4 years after page 39, it all, I hope, kind of blends together. And I looked at it all later like, well, I can't now that I know what it is, I can't like go back and just redraw all of these things, because I've tried that before and it doesn't work. Yeah. You can redraw something and it looks worse than the one that you had, that you kind of figured out at that day. The kind of hatching style of this too, I would photocopy a drawing and hatch it in 6 different ways and just have them up on my studio wall and stare at them, kind of wondering what's the right level of hatching for that one part of the book. Time becomes my collaborator, meaning like I can feel confident about something, but 2 years later I can chuck it and it can feel like a different person made the previous drawing.
Yeah, I guess, and it'll sound like a giant meta question to all this. What did you learn about yourself from making this book, besides never to work in this composition style again? But
yeah, I definitely want to try to answer that. I also want to as I was talking, I want to say, figuring out that drawing, the Croquill thing, the book is not a pastiche, and it's not me like trying to draw like one of those artists. It's really just choosing those tools and trying to come up with a way that's me, that feels appropriate to the story. I think that there's a real difference between, choosing these tools and having it being me versus me feeling like I'm like faking drawing in an old timey way. I definitely was not doing that.
No, no, it looks very much like your style. It looks like it's your hand. Oh, we'll put it that way. Yeah.
And learning about myself, that's a wonderful, huge question. I have a few thoughts. One is this this is so broad and so vague, but I can have my motivations or my ideals in my head, what I believe is right. But what I do might be different, and not even different in some kind of opposite way, but something, parallel. Or I can kind of think, well, it's so hard to talk vaguely, but I can think the society should run this way, but then I'll do all of these things participating in it, and what I think is sort of the best thing I can do under these circumstances, maybe, is how I think about it. But I guess over the years of working on this book, I thought, how much does it matter what I'm thinking or my motivations for anything? Maybe all that matters is what my body is actually doing. Or maybe what matters is what I'm thinking and passing along these thoughts. This is such a bizarre thing to try to articulate, but I think it's the content of the book. Meaning, if you think it's wrong to kill someone, but you kill someone because you think it's the best thing to do, is that any different than you just wanting to go, you wanting to kill someone? How much of the interior life is present in the exterior world?
Yeah.
In terms of making books, if that's how I'm spending, how my limbs are spending their time, how much does my motivation really matter versus some kind of alien to me perspective of what this book actually is? The corporeal self of the book, or how this book, not that they would potentially even be looked at 100 years from now, but definitely when you're engaging with material from so long in the past, you wonder how much it's really illuminating a moment in time, or even illuminating a particular mind. Because, like I said, at that library, I would pick up a diary. That was actually a letter that was actually written at a particular point of time. It's in my hands, and it really felt like it did not. It was mysterious. That it was not often a sort of time capsule. It was only a time capsule, maybe in its physical dimensions. Wow, you really got me rambling trying to explain.
Well, it gets at this question, within the book, you have action and activity, and you have speech, we'll say, or at least what's recorded in letters, and you have thought that lies underneath it, and the tensions of those two separate groups. It's, to me, it's part of what makes the book such a success in showing, what we're saying and what we're doing, and what is the ritual activity versus the in the moment action that we have to make choices about, which I guess I'm rambling about also. But does that sound remotely like what you see when you look at those pages?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. Um, and finding those alignments is was the thing. And again, just like those the 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 way so much historical fiction works, it's usually quite like in that example that I gave before, where it's like someone did something on this particular day. Here's a drawing of that. In my book, it's like text about, this light and like a drawing of, someone climbing over a fallen tree or something, and it's built out of juxtapositions that I really, really, you you there is a story and things happening, and you see how, because I'm many I should say many Quakers that fought, they're they are they were not willfully, they were kind of not willfully doing something that they believe is wrong and thinking about it. um, they were just swept up in the movement of war. But I'm taking text from Quaker communities and pairing it over these people's heads, because I think if you were raised in a very small community and you leave that community, part of your mind always stays with that community. So that kind of became my way of justifying this running juxtaposition, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I think I don't. I think, yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. Are you happy with the book ultimately? No one, I know no artists are ever happy with their work, but
Yeah, I'm amazed. I look at it and I'm kind of amazed that it does have a beginning, middle, end, because it did feel so abstract for so many years. I quit it and restarted it and quit it again. I've made other books and animated movies, but nothing has been as hard as this book. Nothing was as picked over and fraught with indecision, or yeah, the so I don't know, like, happiness is such a I
I always
try
hate when
not
people
to,
ask me if I'm ever happy with anything, so it's okay.
yeah, I try not to use that word. Like, I feel like the United States having that pursuit of happiness is kind of what is messing us up in a lot of ways. That if somehow happiness was less discussed, it would be beneficial. So I can't really think of like happy or sad, but I think like, oh wow, I can't believe that one kind of came together. I really thought it was gone.
I did watch your new movie yesterday. Also, it
Oh,
turned out to be
thanks.
a double feature of that and The Thing for the first time, which
Which
also
thing?
worked. The original, well, the 1982 The Thing, the Kurt Russell Antarctica
Oh, that's
thing.
not the original.
No, I know. I was just, as I was saying original, I realized no, that was a remake before the
Yeah,
remake
yeah.
10 years ago. But can you talk a little about the difference in working on something like Discipline, which seems entirely self-driven, and something like working in animation, particularly a feature movie where you're a writer and director, and that sense of collaboration that you were engaged in? And from there, we can sort of talk about the differing storytelling models, which I also kind of want to get into.
Hmm. Well, the first, I have to say, when you make independent movies, even though they are collaborative, it does have the feeling of the words that you first used to describe the comics, where it does feel self-motivated, meaning
Hmm.
no one is asking you for it. No one came to me saying like, we want a book, we want a graphic novel about Quakers. Like, no, no, it's, I'm trying to make, will these things into existence. And similarly with CryptoZoo, even though other people helped me, no one came to me saying we want, an animated feature that is like this. But the collaboration, strangely, I think, in Discipline, the fact that a lot of the text doesn't technically come from me, it's being appropriated and altered from these different letters. I think that might be something that I got from making animated movies, because it often feels like with animation, I'm arranging, I'm orchestrating, and I'll storyboard something, but if I don't paint that background, if someone else can paint that background more appropriately to the story than me, then fantastic, and then ultimately I'm sort of collaging and arranging together all of these different elements, and that means like different artists, and also like the voice acting, or even like the score, this kind of score going, alongside this kind of imagery. It has a more, I don't know. I think of CryptoZoo as like a large scale collage project. And the other thing that I make CryptoZoo primarily with my wife Jane. She painted most of the cryptids in the movie. So even though I don't have like an evil producer telling me to change this, that, and other thing to make it more commercial, it's really like more like a band, where my producer Kyle will suggest something, Jane will suggest something. You're still getting notes and receiving information and wondering, as you work on something for years, like which note to take and which note not to take. And I think that is I would say it's the hardest part about directing. Yeah.
Have you ever thought of live action, by the way, or is animation your mode when it comes to?
I don't think I have really the personality to pull something like that off. I did drawings for the John Cameron Mitchell movie Rabbit Hole. It's a Nicole Kidman movie, and I visited the set, and I just saw how John could stand in front of 40 people and get them all to do what he wanted and have them all like him on that day. And meaning like there's the pressure of that day. I just saw that saying like, just socially, I'm incapable of that.
Yeah.
And, also, I feel like this, because it wasn't just like, oh, I want to make movies. It was a particular mode of movies that was connected to comics, these kind of limited animation cartoons, like, Speed Racer, or Charlie Brown Christmas Special. Like there's kind of a mode that uses comic skills into like a unique cinematic language, that I see is connected to independent cinema, meaning like, and I was the right age to have this perspective. Like, in the 90s, it was like American independent cinema, Jim Jarmusch, and also all of these Japanese animations so I think I, was maybe one of the few people that was like, okay, Godard, Speed Racer, these things make sense together. They're both kind of harnessing limited means. And a lot of those anime have a kind of an experimental film quality. So the point is, it isn't like just make movies, live action movie. It was more like, oh, there's a specific language that makes 3,000% sense to me. I feel like I have something to contribute there. So that was more the motivation.
And how do the modes of storytelling kind of diverge or converge when it comes to working in comics versus this particular type of animation that you're involved in? I
Well,
mean, this is a linear story, Crypto Zoo, and it's in a certain respect very different than Discipline. But you know,
yeah,
well,
your
you
word
tell me.
linear there is really smart and right, because film is more like oral storytelling, and the how something is dramatized is like how I'm talking now, like slower words, pauses in sentences versus then suddenly talking very fast. And then now we're in this, that's more like a movie, something unfolding in time. Whereas books, especially comics, aren't a time-based medium. They're spatial. It's like, um, in some ways, of course, reading, decoding the words is time based. Turning a page is time based, but uh, it's not like film. Um,
Yeah,
I would never have done Discipline as a movie. I feel like the part of what I love about books is that they don't make any sound, that they're silent, and I think comics can do silence very, very well. And they can also do contradictory information very, very well. Like, um, the I grew up loving comics and cartoons, and I remember thinking as like a 15-year-old, not getting why some people couldn't read comics. Like, it makes so
yeah,
much sense. What do you mean? My grandma can't read comics? I don't get it. But as I'm older now, I think that it makes sense because words are so different than pictures. It's like an entirely different brain.
yeah.
Um, and so you're putting these two very different things next to each other, occupying the same page. And so even if you're like me and have read comics their whole life and feel like you really understand the comics language well, you're still decoding. There's a decoding mindset, a puzzling out mindset. And that lends itself, like I said, well to juxtapositions, contradictions. Um, if you do, like, if in a movie, for example, um, if you put voiceover over a scene, often people's minds will not be critical of the dissonance between what the person is saying and the imagery. Often it's like, oh, that person's talking. That's the point. You kind of
Yeah.
check out a part of your brain checks out, and you're just receiving the information of the voiceover. Um, yeah.
Yeah, it reminds me a little when I finally sat down with Milton Glaser a couple of years ago, and he
Cool.
mentioned what was really weird about how big I Love New York got was that it was three different sets of semiotic symbols in four letters,
Yeah.
and yet
Brilliant.
nobody thought this doesn't work. The letter I, the heart, NY is an abbreviation for New York, and yet you see it and you just know everything. You can integrate all that in a heartbeat. Um, so
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Um, when it comes to comics, or when it comes, I guess, well, we'll say comics and then storytelling. What have you gotten better at over the years, and what sort of challenges do you give yourself? I mean, you talk about discipline as a whole challenge in and of itself, but broader, you know, tell me all that.
You're asking me things. I feel like I'm kind of just praising myself in some weird way. I feel a little uncomfortable, but
What are you worse at? You can throw that in
yeah,
too if you
I
want.
got worse. I got slower. Oh my gosh. Especially when I started drawing these comics early on, I could just make a lot of pages. Not that they were any good, but I just, for somehow I could just bend over the drawing table, and I had a level of energy that now I even I would have like a day job and somehow I drew more comic pages than I have now. I don't understand. So I
We
got
call that the
slower.
20s. It's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but the things that I've gotten better at are kind of over the years, that, I, man, I'd like to think that, a lot of things that were made that began as intellectual. I'll try to pick a concrete example. Um, in when I first, well, it was in college, so many of the alternative comics then were black and white. Um, or they were, if they were colored, they were kind of like Tintin coloring or Chris Ware coloring, kind of naturalistic color. Or there was silkscreen comics like Rubber Blanket, two colors combining to make a third color. So the point is, it felt like color as like adding meaning or content to the comic felt like kind of an unexplored area. So I did a bunch of comics. Many of them were in the Fantagraphics anthology Mome. That was sort of, how can color add content, add meaning, and not just be a supportive element to the comic. So it was sort of I would say, formal, an intellectual attack. Not that they were really smart or anything. They were just kind of me thinking about color. How can color add meaning? Now, I don't think about that at all, and it just feels much more intuitive. I think that all of the unusual color decisions in CryptoZoo, I don't think I could articulate it, and again, because I work on these movies with other people, sometimes it'll be something like, oh, we made the DVD menu for High School Sinking, and we had someone color it like you, and I see it, and it doesn't look
Yeah.
like me.
Mm-hmm.
I know I
Yeah.
would never color something like that, so I have to color it. And I don't think I could articulate the difference. It's just inside me. Um, so that's one example.
And
Yeah.
do you remember a moment of this is my style?
No, especially as I've made more, and I've, they've been, the story for each one comes first, and then I try to kind of figure out the best way to draw it. So the drawings look pretty different from each other. Discipline looks different than Clue, and looks different than Body World, and um, but the fact that I I have stayed in that mode, it's all been not my choice, meaning like, I would love to just have a bunch of books that look similar and the stories are different. I think that I would be great with that. It just hasn't turned out that way. Um, and Greg Hunter, a comics critic, wrote a book about me that's coming out. It's like a critical survey of my work. And he sent me a PDF of it after he had finished it. He didn't ask, I didn't have to read it. It's his book. And the first chapter kind of talks about this and says that it's kind of made me, like I prevented a kind of popularity to my work, because it isn't like creating one consistent thing that would potentially penetrate the public consciousness. It's just kind of staying a bit elusive or confusing each time. So that was interesting to read, for me to read. It was kind of like, okay, that's why I'm not more popular after having made so many books. There's an artist I like named Seiichi Hayashi, and his work is different from each other, from pretty different, one story to the next. And in an interview I read, they asked him about it, and he said it's so he stays at the level of an amateur, that each time he's somehow getting better, but also having some of that amateur spark of when you see the beginning of an idea, or of an idea locking into place, a sensibility locking into place. So I don't know, I thought that was kind of an interesting way to answer that. It's certainly not like a conscious thing on my part. But I think there is something to that, where each one feels like, the first and last one, the only one. Like, if someone could just read Discipline and not know anything else about me, fantastic. I really liked doing a Clue book, and just the idea of someone liking Clue and not liking me, or not having anything, being interested at all in me, and just wanting to read, a murder mystery. And I really tried to deliver to that hypothetical person. I had another thought that popped into my head about it. I don't know. I think.
Well, I'll ask in relation to Greg's book. Do you read the reviews of your work?
With movies, you kind of get. You don't really have to read all of them, but you kind of are aware of them. So I kind of dip my toe in. And the thing also about movies is you do test. You work on this thing for so long with other people, you end up getting all the notes. If you do it right, you get all the notes you're ever going to get. Meaning, often if I do read a review, they're like, "Oh, they think that I heard that before. I heard that 3 years ago," and I like you end up kind of processing all of these different potential reactions or interpretations. And again, that's, like I said, the hardest thing about directing. Like, you'll screen a scene, for example, and you'll show it to 12 people, and 5 people understand it, and 5 people don't understand it, and one person thought it was this thing that had something you didn't intend, and this other person thought this other thing, and then you like look at it and you're like, well, what do I do with this? Like, what do I change? Do I change something? Do I not change? I can't just like pick. Okay, this one person got it. Great.
That's my audience.
Yeah. that's yeah. I try to kind of process all the information, and it's also just to pick I do some of that with my books, but again, with Discipline, it was more like a time, meaning I would set it aside for 4 months and then look at a scene again and try to get some kind of clear eyes on whether or not this was communicating what I wanted to, or tonally was appropriate. But for example, like, people will, and a lot of times someone will say something and you're like, that's a great idea. I never would have thought of that. Perfect. I want to use that, and you'll implement it. That happens a lot. Other times you'll get a feeling that people want the book or the movie to be one thing. Meaning, Crypto Zoo, when we were working on it, many people kind of wanted it to be funnier, wanted it to be a comedy. It's animated. It's got mythological creatures. Why isn't this thing funny? Yeah. And I always felt like if there's a humor, it's maybe in just an off-kilter kind of quality, or a contrarian quality, or it's in a sensibility, but it's not really a comedy. It's so I actually took jokes out of Crypto Zoo because I felt like it's not a comedy, and even if maybe the majority of people, working on it would have preferred it to be a comedy. So I don't know. It's a whole mind warp. And then you'll read a review and it'll be like, Crypto Zoo, it's not funny at all. F. All right. That's a simplification. I mean, I've also tried to, um, write about other people's work. So I know um, I'm not criticizing the critics at all. It's really, it's the, I love Jules Pfeiffer, and I wrote a review of one of his books, and I really pulled my hair out writing that thing, trying to explain. I mean, I know um,
One of his
it
two
isn't
graphic novels.
it isn't as simple as what I said.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that, like you were saying, sort of exploring what the artist's motivation is versus what your reaction to it was versus what your expectations of it were. Those are all three very, very different things, I guess.
It it really makes me realize why these movies and books that have locatable emotional responses are easy. Man, I don't know. But I don't want to say you. It's like if you have if something is a comedy and you screen it and people laugh, it's a locatable success.
Yeah.
And or if it's a horror movie and people scream or are scared, you know, the you were out for something, you got it. Maybe 80% of the audience screamed, but still that's the majority. And like you can the response to CryptoZoo, it's much murkier territory and discipline. It's like, it's not like I want someone to laugh here or be scared there. It's more like some art school experiential thing where hopefully it's not like I'm trying to be difficult or be like I have something to hide or be some, it's because I think that those areas are exciting and kind of activate parts of myself that is rewarding. So anyway, it's all stuff that I think about on a regular basis.
No, I mean, what's great to me is to get two projects like this, one of which, in a sense, is about stillness, and the other one, which is, we'll say, an action thriller with cryptids, from the same the same voice, I guess, the same person speaking, and yet you're able to convey, as you say, an excitement in both of those. The double whammy of that was a really, really neat process for me over the past week, experiencing both of those. So, one question that came up when well, the one time I saw you speak, McNally Jackson, a bunch of years ago with Frank
Oh,
Santoro.
wow.
Yeah, I forget. I was in town for a conference, and I thought, oh, well, I'll go see Frankie and Dash, because I've read 700 pages of your work in one shot. So I thought it'd be good to see you. Frank was sort of demonstrating theories of page layouts and what Frank does, and you were talking more about the dumb line you were drawing with, and that, I guess, ties into the question of not what you got better at, but how the techniques or tools have changed for you over the years, what things you've either discovered or, whether there's an interaction between, what you and Frank were both talking about once upon a time in terms of what comics are and how they're formed and what the reader does when they see them.
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, that's hard for me to say. I can't remember exactly if this was during the same time, but Frank and I lived together for a while. And and when I tell people that, they think, oh, we really see eye to eye on comics, and but I have to tell you,
No.
we would argue about comics passionately, and I think if there's one thing, as the art comics, whatever you want to call them, unusual comics, it's a small, it's hard to find people who really care about it. just like I remember when High School Sinking came out, they did a press and industry screening at the Toronto International Film Festival. So it's not a public screening; it's just for press. And the publicist was like, "Oh yeah, 100 people were there." And I was like, "What? 100 people?" And they were like, "Well, won't all write reviews, but like I could not find 100, press interested in unusual comics. Like, but Frank and I, we care like about these. We would, Frank's a different personality than me. If I didn't like something he liked, he would scream and throw the comic across the room, and we would get at it. So it was really, 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 really wonderful to spend so much time with someone who cared so much about this weird thing as you. And when I think about, that was the more important than any other thing, real honestly. And it was a wonderful feeling, that I can't, I can't really remember when that McNally Jackson thing was, but there was a feeling in the air that new comics, there was a new kind of comics that was different than the 90s alternative comics, even though I love the 90s alternative comics, but so it was great to feel like you're participating in something that like the public might not care, but we know it's the coolest thing. That's a great feeling that I hope other cartoonists have, especially cartoonists in their 20s. It really helps you be motivated and be engaged and not down on yourself. Yeah.
I'm the one upshot of doing these shows remotely is that I can also have a browser window open while we talk. And I looked up McNally Jackson, Shaw Santoro. Apparently it was April 2010 before I even started the podcast. Yeah, which is a fact that we're all dating ourselves. Oh my God, there's a picture of you too. Also, I got to include that with the episode. But yeah, it's, it was interesting because not that Frank intellectualized what a comic is and you were portraying things more from an intuitive perspective, but that, when you're facing an audience, one side is going to appeal more than another, depending on, who's receiving and who's articulating the stuff. But I guess my big question, since you've juggled multiple projects throughout your career and have these two projects out right now, dare I ask what's next? Or is that something that's really, really, really bad to ask you?
Well, I don't want to jinx anything, That's
that's what I figured.
Yeah, I'd love to make another animated movie. I'm working on it. I have another book I'm working on. So, yeah, I don't want to jinx
good.
it.
As long as stuff is in progress, as long as you're actively working on something, I feel good. As opposed to you saying, "I don't have anything in my head right now," which would make me feel really.
No.
And the question I always ask people: what are you reading? Whether it's prose, comics, or whatever. Anything jump out at you in recent months that you want to share?
Recently, I read. Oh wow! I just got a bunch of things from the Brooklyn Book Fest. I've got Storm from the New York Review of Books. Have you heard of this?
No, I don't know it.
It's kind of like this other book that the New York Review of Books put out called Heaven's Breath. That's Heaven's Breath is all about wind, and air, and it's great. It's like
just looked it up. It's George R. Stewart is the author
of Storm. Yeah. So Heaven's Breath. It's like 300 pages. Literally about air, about nothing, and kind of exploring this nothingness that's around us. And Storm is, a book that's from the perspective of weather and and changes in temperature, and so there are human characters in it, but they're all like looking up at a cloud and commenting on it or charting the weather. It's really, really cool.
Cool. Now, have you read the Peregrine from New York Review Books? I mean, it's a reissue, but I'll send
Which
you a
one?
copy. The Peregrine. I keep like a dozen copies of this book on hand to send people, so I'll get your address after this and mail you a copy. Basically,
Oh, cool.
nature writer following peregrine falcons in eastern England in the 60s.
Oh, and the cover is like a painting of a falcon, right?
Yeah, yeah. It's some of the most beautiful writing ever from one of the most deeply misanthropic writers I've ever read. But anyway, I'll share it with you because that's the gift I try to give mankind is, spreading the gospel of that book around. So
Cool.
Meanwhile, do you get out to festivals at all, or are you still pandemically staying in?
Well, I did a bunch of film festivals for Crypto Zoo just as travel, international travel opened up. I only for Discipline, I only did that Brooklyn Book Fest. It just came out. I haven't done a comic. I can't think of a comic convention or a comic festival that's opened up since the pandemic, but, I did lots of film festivals, Angoulême. I was in the Czech Republic. I traveled all over, which was really, interesting and rewarding, to see I don't know. I recommend, go if you make an independent film, doing those film festivals is really kind of the best part of it. It's especially for unusual animated movies. It's kind of one of the few times where normal people want to see an unusual animated movie. Like if Crypto Zoo's playing at their local theater, they might just be confused by it. But if it's part of, a film festival, and on their programming, then an unusual, the audience is there for it in a different way. I wish somehow I could take that excitement and just shoot it into normal people, but
it's understandable, and I'll do my best to promote both the book and the movie because
thanks.
Yeah, my wife was napping in the other room, so I had Crypto Zoo on the big TV, but with the AirPods in, so the sound was right inside my head watching this thing, and big screen, but focused audio experience. It was really just gorgeous and hallucinatory in its way. So.
When Sundance programmed it, it was virtual, but they also set up all of these drive-in screenings.
Ooh.
And Jane and I went to one, and that was kind of like that because when you're sitting in a car, so it's on this giant screen, and like something, it's like that J.G. Ballard thing of like the car is like your body. And so when you listen to music in your car, it feels like it's happening in your head. And it was really cool to like look at a giant, billboard sized screen with the night sky behind it, but have the score like playing inside your own head.
Nice. Yeah, that's an experience I'd love to see. But anyway, my point about traveling is if you're going to be in New York, or if you and I are ever going to be at a festival at the same time again, I hope we could sit down and do this in person because I love the remote thing and being able to fact check on the fly. But, it'd be great to see you for real.
Thank you. Yeah, same.
And that was Dash Shaw. Go check out his new book, Discipline, from New York Review Comics, and his new movie, Crypto Zoo, in theaters and on streaming platforms from Magnolia Pictures. You ought to check out some of Dash's past books, like Cosplayers, New School, Body World, and Bottomless Belly Button, and his previous animated movie, My Entire High School Sinking into the Sea. You can see all of Dash's work at his site, dashshaw.net, which is DASHSHAW.net. Don't go to .com. He's also on Instagram as _Shaw. He has a Twitter account at _Shaw, all one word, but doesn't really use that. Anyway, there'll be links to all this stuff on the show and episode notes for this one, as well as a link to the blog post I made back in 2010 about his conversation with Frank Santoro, which I blathered on about in this episode. Anyway, you can support the Virtual Memories Show by telling other people about it. Let them know there is this guy making these hour-plus long arts conversations every single week. And you can also help support the show by writing to me and just telling me what you like and don't like about it, who you'd like to hear me record with, what movie or TV show or book or piece of music or theater, artwork, whatever you think I should turn listeners on to. And you can do that by email, postcard, letter, or by leaving a message on my Google Voice number, which is 973-869-9659. That goes directly to voicemail, so you don't have to worry about getting stuck in a conversation with me. And you can leave a message up to 3 minutes long. And let me know afterwards if it's okay to include your message on the show, because I might like to do that sometime, but I would never do it without your permission. Now, that's the way you can support me. If you have money and resources to spare, don't give them to me. Help other people and help institutions in need. You can find people through GoFundMe, Patreon, Kickstarter, Indiegogo. There are a lot of places, a lot of people who could use help with expenses, with medical bills, with supporting artistic projects, and more. And if you're looking for somewhere to start with institutions or foundations, look to your local food bank, the Poor People's Campaign, Freedom Funds, election registration funds. There are a lot of things you can do to help build a better world, so I hope you will. Our music for this episode is Fella by Hal Mayforth, used with permission from the artist. You should visit my archives to check out my episode with Hal from the summer of 2018 and learn more about his art and painting. And you can listen to his music at soundcloud.com/Mayforth. And that's MAY4TH. And that's it for this week's episode of the Virtual Memories Show. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back next week with another great conversation. You can subscribe to the Virtual Memories Show and download past episodes at the iTunes Store. You can also find all our episodes and get on our email list at either of our websites, vmspod.com or chimeraobscura.com/VM. You can also follow the Virtual Memories Show on Twitter and Instagram at vmspod, at virtualmemoriespodcast.tumblr.com, and on YouTube, Spotify, and TuneIn.com by searching for Virtual Memories Show. And if you like this podcast, please tell your pals, talk it up on social media, and go to iTunes, look up the Virtual Memories Show, and leave a rating and maybe a review for us. It all goes to helping us build a bigger audience. You've been listening to the Virtual Memories Show. I'm your host, Gil Roth. Keep reading, keep making art, and keep the conversation going.